why is this one sugary snack actually lowering blood sugar markers in clinical observations? Most people are absolutely terrified of anything sweet when they're dealing with insulin resistance, and honestly, that makes sense. You've been told sugar is the enemy. You've been told sweet equals dangerous. But here's what no one is telling you. There is one food, sweet, natural, and available in almost every grocery store on the planet that contains the exact compounds your damaged insulin receptors are starving for. And right now, the science behind it is quietly rewriting what we thought we knew about metabolic recovery. Stay with me, because in this episode, I'm going to walk you through exactly what that food is, why it works at a cellular level, and the specific way to use it that most people completely get wrong. And I'll also tell you the one thing that happens to your cells when you eat it correctly that no one in mainstream health is talking about yet. Health is not a destination, it's a rhythm you learn to ride. We don't just treat symptoms here at VitaWave. We decode your biological waves to turn back the clock from the inside out. I'm Dr. Elias Site, and today we go deep on something the algorithm doesn't push because it challenges everything. Act 1. The problem, the invisible damage. Let's start with what's actually happening inside your body when insulin resistance takes hold. Because most explanations stop at your cells stop responding to insulin, and that's technically true, but it misses the real story. When your cells become resistant to insulin, the pancreas doesn't just shrug and give up, it starts screaming. It floods your bloodstream with more and more insulin, desperately trying to force glucose into your cells. And what happens when insulin levels stay chronically elevated? Your cell walls, the membranes that are supposed to flex, absorb nutrients, and communicate with surrounding tissue, begin to harden. Specifically, the lipid bilayers surrounding each cell start losing fluidity. They become rigid, and when that happens, even the cells that haven't lost their insulin receptors yet can't respond properly because the physical architecture needed to process that signal is compromised. This is the part that most dietary advice completely ignores. It's not just about blood sugar numbers. It's about your cell membranes. It's about the physical integrity of the surface through which your entire metabolic process operates. And that, right there, is why simply cutting sugar doesn't always move the needle for people the way they expect it to. You can lower glucose, you can restrict carbohydrates, but if you haven't addressed membrane rigidity, your cells are still locked out. The damage is still there, the inflammation is still compounding, and you're left wondering why the numbers improve slightly, but the fatigue, the brain fog, the weight stagnation, none of that really moves. Sound familiar? Because if it does, you're in the right place. Because today, we're talking about addressing the problem at the membrane level and the one food that does it in a way nothing else quite replicates. Act 2. The reveal. The counterintuitive breakthrough. The food is raw honey. Specifically, minimally processed, high polyphenol, dark varietal raw honey. Now, before you click away, I need you to sit with the discomfort of that for a moment, because your instinct right now is exactly what makes this conversation so important. You heard honey, and something in your brain fired a warning signal. Sweet, sugar, dangerous. That's the conditioning talking. Here's what the conditioning missed. Raw honey, particularly buckwheat honey and manuka honey, contains something called methylglyoxal alongside a dense concentration of flavonoids and phenolic compounds. These aren't incidental. These are biologically active molecules that interact directly with your inflammatory cascade, the same inflammatory process that is accelerating cell membrane rigidity in insulin resistance. In a 2021 review published in the journal Nutrients, researchers examined the anti-diabetic mechanisms of honey across 18 controlled studies. What they found wasn't just about glycemic response. They found measurable reductions in fasting insulin levels, decreases in inflammatory markers like CRP and IL-6, and, crucially, evidence of improved insulin receptor sensitivity in subjects consuming raw honey compared to equivalent glucose loads from refined sugar or corn syrup. The difference is the polyphenol content. Refined sugar is empty. It hits your bloodstream fast, spikes glucose, triggers inflammation. Raw honey, particularly the darker varieties, delivers that glucose alongside a pharmacological payload of compounds that simultaneously suppress the inflammatory response that glucose might otherwise trigger. In simple terms, raw honey essentially carries its own antidote. The sweetness and the medicine come in the same package, and that is something glucose simply cannot do. But here's the part that really changes everything, and this is where I need you to pay close attention. Act 3. The mechanism. Cellular precision. Raw honey's effect on insulin resistance isn't just anti-inflammatory, it's structural. The flavonoids in high polyphenol honey, particularly quercetin, camphorol, and lucilin, have demonstrated in multiple cell culture studies the ability to modulate the lipid composition of cell membranes. What that means is they influence which fatty acids get incorporated into your cell walls, and when you increase the proportion of unsaturated fatty acids in a cell membrane, you increase its fluidity. More fluid membranes. That's what we're talking about. More fluid membranes mean insulin receptors can flex, rotate, and signal correctly. They mean glucose transporter proteins, specifically GLUT4, can move to the cell surface the way they're supposed to when insulin calls for them. This is not a marginal effect. This is the core mechanism of insulin sensitivity, addressed at the physical, structural level. And here's what makes it practically remarkable. This happens with relatively small amounts of honey. We're not talking about eating it by the jar. The studies that observed these membrane-level effects used amounts in the range of 1 to 2 teaspoons, consumed strategically, not casually. Which brings me to the part that determines whether this actually works for you or whether it becomes just another thing you tried. Act 4. The protocol. What nobody gets right. The timing and context of how you consume raw honey changes its entire biological impact. Most people who try to incorporate honey into a health regimen do it the wrong way. They add it to morning coffee. They drizzle it over oatmeal already full of rapidly digesting starch. They eat it in the afternoon as a sweet treat, and then they wonder why their glucose monitoring app shows the same spike it always did. Here's what the research and clinical observation actually point to. Protocol 1. The pre-sleep window. One of the most overlooked applications of raw honey is consuming half a teaspoon to 1 teaspoon approximately 30 to 45 minutes before sleep.
During sleep, your liver is the primary organ managing blood glucose. It's essentially in maintenance mode, slowly releasing glucose to maintain stable blood sugar through the night. Raw honey consumed before sleep provides the liver with a slow, glycogen-rich fuel source. Specifically, its fructose component converts to liver glycogen, which then regulates overnight glucose release. Less glucose instability overnight means lower fasting insulin levels in the morning, and lower morning insulin is where metabolic recovery starts. This is what hibernation researchers first noticed when studying animals' metabolic responses during torpor, a state where the liver becomes incredibly efficient at glucose management. Raw honey mirrors this biochemically in a way a refined sugar never can, precisely because of the fructose to glucose ratio and the polyphenol content dampening any resulting inflammatory signal. Protocol 2, the post-training window. If you exercise, specifically resistance training, there is a window of roughly 30 to 60 minutes post-workout where your muscle cells are dramatically more insulin sensitive than at any other time of day. Consuming raw honey in this window, ideally paired with a protein source, allows the flavonoids to interact with your temporarily upregulated GLUT4 transporters in a uniquely favorable environment. The cells are already primed. The honey's compounds arrive at a moment of maximum biological receptivity. Most people are drinking refined sports drinks or eating processed protein bars in this window. Replacing that with raw honey and a clean protein source is one of the simplest upgrades you can make to your metabolic recovery protocol, and it costs almost nothing. Protocol 3, the critical pairing rule. Raw honey should never be consumed in isolation if you're managing insulin resistance. It should always arrive with fat or protein. This slows gastric emptying, reduces the glycemic velocity of the honey's glucose content, and gives the polyphenols more time in contact with the intestinal lining, where a significant portion of their anti-inflammatory activity actually occurs. A small amount of raw almond butter alongside your honey is not just a preference, it's a biological strategy. Act 5, the bigger picture. Why your body is not broken. I want to step back for a moment because this isn't just about honey. This is about a paradigm. We live in a health culture obsessed with subtraction. Remove this, eliminate that. Cut the carbs, cut the sugar, cut the fruit, cut everything that tastes good. And for some people, in some contexts, restriction is a necessary first move. I'm not dismissing that. But restriction is a starting point, not a healing strategy. Your body didn't become insulin resistant because it was deficient in willpower. It became insulin resistant because it was operating in a pro-inflammatory, nutrient-imbalanced, chronically stressed environment. And you don't heal an environment through subtraction alone. You heal it through intelligent addition. Raw honey, used correctly in the right amounts at the right times with the right pairings, is not a cheat. It is a clinically grounded, biochemically intelligent tool for rebuilding the cellular environment that insulin sensitivity depends on. And the fact that it feels counterintuitive, that's not a bug. That's the signal that you're operating with newer, more precise information than the fear-based dietary messaging that's dominated the past 30 years. Your cells are not permanently damaged. Membrane fluidity can be restored. Insulin receptor sensitivity can be rebuilt. The biology is on your side, and it was always on your side. You just needed the right information delivered in the right sequence. That's what we do at VitaWave. We don't chase trends. We read the waves, the biological rhythms your body is already transmitting, and we translate them into strategies that actually move the needle. Act 6, practical summary. Let me bring this together so you leave today with something you can act on immediately. 1. Choose the right honey. Buckwheat honey or manuka honey with a UMF rating of 10 or above. Darker color means higher polyphenol concentration. Raw, unfiltered, unheated. Heating above 40 degrees Celsius destroys the enzyme activity and much of the flavonoid content, which defeats the entire purpose. 2. Use the pre-sleep window, half a teaspoon to 1 teaspoon, 30 to 45 minutes before bed, on its own or with a small amount of fat. This stabilizes overnight liver glucose and reduces fasting insulin. Measure your morning fasting glucose for 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after. The data will speak for itself. 3. Use the post-training window, 1 teaspoon paired with protein within 30 to 60 minutes of resistance training. Your GLUT4 transporters will do the rest. 4. Never eat it alone or with rapidly digesting starch, always with fat, protein, or both. The fiber content of the pairing is also beneficial, slowing absorption and feeding the gut microorganisms that themselves contribute to insulin signaling. 5. Track, don't assume. If you're monitoring your glucose, and if you're managing insulin resistance, I hope you are, log your readings before and after implementing this. Biology is individual. The majority of evidence points toward the mechanisms I've described today, but your body will give you the most accurate answer. Trust the data your own biology produces. Before you go, I want to ask you something honest. How long have you been managing this? How many things have you cut out, restricted, or given up, only to find yourself still fatigued, still frustrated, still watching numbers that won't budge the way you need them to? If any part of today's episode resonated, if the idea that your cells can actually rebuild, that membranes can regain their fluidity, that something as seemingly simple as a teaspoon of the right honey at the right time could be a missing piece, then you already feel the shift in perspective that changes everything. Your biology is not fixed. It is fluid, responsive, and waiting for the right signal. And we are here every episode to decode that signal with you. If this opens something up for you, share it with one person who needs to hear it. Not because engagement metrics matter, but because the person in your life who is quietly struggling with this deserves to know these conversations exist. Subscribe to VitaWave, because next week we're going inside the gut-insulin axis, the second brain connection that determines whether any dietary change you make actually sticks at the cellular level. You do not want to miss it. Until then, learn the rhythm, ride the wave. I'm Dr. Elias Site, and this has been VitaWave.